They laughed in her face. In a room full of suits and power, she was the joke. No money, no connections, just an idea. 2 years later, she walked back into that same building as the new owner. This isn't just a comeback, it's a takeover. They didn't just laugh, they roared. The moment Danielle Rivers stepped back from the whiteboard, the sound hit her like a slap. Sharp, echoing, and cold. It wasn't the quiet, polite kind of chuckle you give someone who tried. No, this was full-blown amusement. As if what she had just pitched wasn't a carefully researched development strategy, but the punchline of a bad joke. It was her first time pitching in a corporate boardroom like that. A glass-walled, high-rise palace of polished marble, expensive suits, and intimidating silence. The kind of place where deals were made behind closed doors and smiles didn't always mean kindness. Danielle had prepared for this day for weeks. She had studied late into the night, refined every data point, practiced her presentation until she could recite it in her sleep. And yet, here she was, standing alone in front of 10 men in tailored suits, most of them twice her age and none of them taking her seriously. Her idea was bold. A mixed-use real estate project in an underdeveloped area of the city. Residential units, small business retail spaces, green rooftop gardens, everything designed for both profit and purpose. She even named the project after her grandmother, Evelyn Heights. But none of that mattered now. The laughter felt like it lasted forever. One man leaned back in his leather chair and actually wiped a tear from the corner of his eye. "I'm about to hand it to you," he said, catching his breath. "You got guts, Ms. Rivers. But this is the real world. This isn't a college class project." The others chuckled in agreement. Another man, silver-haired with a gold pen in his hand, tilted his head and smiled condescendingly. "You'll learn," he said, "this business isn't built on dreams and passion. It's built on capital, experience, and, let's be honest, knowing the right people." Danielle just stood there, still, not blinking. In that moment, something clicked inside her. Not shame, not embarrassment. Something clearer, sharper, stronger. She realized that no amount of spreadsheets, graphs, or logic would have changed their reaction. They had already decided who she was the moment she walked into the room. A young black woman with no rich last name, no connections, no gray hair, no golf course stories. They didn't just doubt her idea. They doubted her. But what they didn't know was that Danielle had already been underestimated her entire life. This was just another room, another set of suits, another echo chamber full of men who thought they were the gatekeepers of success. She calmly gathered her notes, closed her laptop, straightened her blazer. Then she looked around the room and said, with quiet clarity, "Thank you for your time." And she walked out. No anger, no outburst, just silence and confidence. The kind of silence that makes people uncomfortable. The kind that stays in the air even after someone leaves. As she exited, one of the junior analysts, a young woman maybe a few years older than Danielle, gave her the slightest nod. It was small, almost invisible, but Danielle saw it, and it was enough, because she wasn't coming back. Not to ask, not to pitch, not to beg. No, she had something better in mind. Danielle walked out of that boardroom into the blinding light of the downtown skyline and made herself a quiet promise. "I won't knock on another door. I'll build my own." It was bold, maybe foolish, but she meant it. She took the train back to her one-bedroom apartment, the one with the peeling paint and the humming fridge. She poured herself a glass of water, sat at her tiny kitchen table, and reopened her laptop. On the screen were her notes, her floor plans, her projections. But this time, she didn't see just numbers. She saw fuel. Fuel from every laugh, every smirk, every moment of doubt she had endured just to get in that room. They thought the pitch was a failure. They thought she'd give up. But Danielle knew something they didn't. You don't need everyone to believe in you. Just enough proof to believe in yourself. So she got to work. Danielle didn't cry that night. She wanted to, but she didn't. Not when she got back home. Not when she closed her apartment door and dropped her laptop bag by the couch. Not even when she replayed that awful moment in the boardroom over and over in her head. Instead, she opened her notebook, the same one she had used in the pitch, and wrote at the top of a blank page. What they said, too young, too broke, too bold. Then underneath it, she scribbled, "What I'll show them, watch me." Rejection has a strange way of either crushing you or crafting you. And Danielle? She chose the second. In the weeks that followed, she did what most people wouldn't. She didn't delete her project. She didn't take a break. She didn't abandon her dream to chase something easier. She doubled down. By day, Danielle worked her contract job as a junior analyst. It paid just enough to cover rent and keep the lights on, but barely left room for anything else. By night, she was on YouTube learning about real estate syndication, attending free online webinars about commercial lending, zoning laws, tax codes, and how to structure deals without using your own money. Her Friday nights weren't parties anymore. They were spreadsheets, budget simulations, and blueprint revisions. Her circle of friends shrunk. Not everyone understood her obsession. Some told her to be realistic. Others simply disappeared when she stopped saying yes to every weekend plan. But Danielle wasn't bitter, just focused. She used rejection as her syllabus. Every insult became a challenge. Every no became a reason to dig deeper. She started showing up at local community meetings. At first, she just sat quietly, taking notes as city officials discussed zoning codes and district plans. Then she started asking questions. Then people started noticing her. She met small developers, independent builders with heart, but not always strategy. She offered to help them with research and analysis for free. They were shocked. "Why are you doing this?" one asked. "Because I need to learn," she said. Eventually, she became known in that small circle as the girl with the numbers. People started emailing her. "Can you run some projections for me? Can you review this proposal? Can you model the ROI on this duplex I'm thinking of buying?" She said yes to everything, not because of money, but because every project taught her something. At one point, she worked 3 side gigs just to survive. One was a weekend receptionist job at a co-working space. The second was a virtual assistant job she did during her lunch breaks. The third, driving for a ride-share app. She used her breaks to take notes on audiobooks like Rich Dad, Poor Dad and Principles by Ray Dalio. Her car became her classroom. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't Instagram-worthy, but it was real. Danielle was building herself brick by brick, quietly, stubbornly, patiently. But it wasn't just hustle. It was strategy. She started building a network, not the traditional kind with suits and LinkedIn handshakes, but real people who were trying to make things happen. Barbershop owners who wanted to expand. Single moms who wanted to own instead of rent. Old school landlords looking to retire, but not sure how to sell. Danielle became their translator. She helped them understand spreadsheets, wrote proposals, and modeled returns. In return, she got something money couldn't buy: trust. That trust became her first informal investor circle. A retired teacher put in $5,000. A mechanic gave her $3,500. A cafe owner contributed $10,000. They didn't invest in a corporation. They invested in her. Because by now, she wasn't just Danielle from the boardroom. She was Danielle who showed up, who learned, who gave, who delivered. 2 years after that humiliating pitch, she finally had enough to launch her first real project. It wasn't huge, not the skyscraper she once dreamed of. It was a modest, worn-down 2-story brick building on the edge of a forgotten block. Most people walked past it without a second glance. But Danielle saw something different. She saw a test, a challenge, an opportunity. She poured her savings into it, redesigned the structure, negotiated with vendors, managed contractors, and when it opened 6 months later, it was 100% leased within 10 weeks. Small businesses, local entrepreneurs, freelancers, people who, like her, just needed a chance. That project became her proof. Suddenly, banks took her meetings. Suddenly, architects returned her calls. Suddenly, those same investors who once ignored her started listening. But Danielle didn't forget. She remembered the laughter, the condescension, the way they had dismissed her without even opening their minds. And that memory, it wasn't bitter anymore. It was fuel, because she had built something from rejection. She had turned not enough into more than enough. And this was just the beginning. Sometimes, the people who change your life don't come with applause or introductions. Sometimes they just walk in with a quiet presence and an open mind. For Danielle, that person was Marcus Bell. She met him by accident, or maybe fate, during a city-sponsored networking event for local developers. It was one of those dry, awkward mixers held in a small hotel conference room with stale coffee and printed name tags. Danielle wasn't planning on staying long. She had already spoken to a few people, handed out her pitch deck to some skeptical-looking attendees, and was heading for the exit when an older man, sitting alone at the back table, raised his coffee cup and said, "You're the only one here who actually looks like they've done the math." Danielle blinked. He wasn't being sarcastic, just observant. She walked over. He introduced himself simply as Marcus, a former architect, retired, built everything from office parks to schools in his 40-year career. He wasn't flashy. He wore a faded gray blazer, brown shoes that had seen better days, and he had a notebook filled with sketches. "Let me see what you've got," he said. Danielle hesitated, but handed him her portfolio anyway. He studied it in silence, flipped through each page, his brow furrowed. He asked questions, not the kind meant to poke holes, but the kind that showed he actually cared about the answers. After nearly 20 minutes, he nodded slowly and said, "Let me guess, they called you crazy?" Danielle let out a small laugh. "More than once." Marcus smiled. "Good. Every empire starts with crazy." That moment was the spark. Over the following months, Marcus became more than a mentor. He became Danielle's strategic advantage. He reviewed every plan she drafted. He introduced her to architects who took her seriously because Marcus vouched for her. He walked her through structural regulations, taught her how to catch red flags in contractor bids, and even showed her how to sketch elevations by hand, something she had never learned. But more than anything, he believed in her. Not because of her potential, but because of her preparation. "You do the work," he told her once. "You actually show up." That's rare. Danielle, for the first time, felt seen, not for her ambition, not for her vision, but for her grit. Then came her break. Marcus connected her with Darnell Sloan, a retired entrepreneur and one of the early pioneers of tech in the late 90s. He had made millions and quietly invested in small, impact-driven projects. Darnell was blunt when they met. "I don't invest in hype. I invest in heart and homework." Danielle showed him both. She laid out her plan, not with fluff, but with spreadsheets, zoning permits, demographic analysis, and even live rent comps. When she finished, he tapped his pen against the table and said, "You remind me of myself, except smarter." Then he wrote a check, $100,000. It wasn't enough to buy a building, but it was enough to make the banks listen, enough to finalize her LLC, enough to start real development. Then came another investor, and another. People who had heard about the girl who turned a dead corner of the city into a thriving space. People who respected the fact that she didn't skip steps, that she didn't pitch fantasies, she built foundations. She launched her next project, the Crestwood Collective, a hybrid space with small offices, a community cafe, and event rooms for local artists. She called it her middle finger with a smile. It was modern, welcoming, and profitable within 6 months. From there, momentum rolled in like a wave. She partnered with local city programs to offer discounted space to minority-owned businesses. Her spaces weren't just developments, they were ecosystems. And the media noticed. Articles called her the youngest woman changing the cityscape. Her story began circulating in podcasts and urban development blogs. Suddenly, Danielle Rivers wasn't just a name. She was a movement. But even as her star rose, she never forgot the blueprint that got her here. Rejection, resilience, and real work. She still drove by the old boardroom building sometimes. The same place they laughed at her. Only now, it looked a little different. A for sale sign hung crooked in the window. The company was downsizing, rumors of bankruptcy spreading quietly in the industry. Danielle smiled, not out of revenge, but because the universe was full of irony. Then one day, she got the call. An agent asked her if she'd be interested in bidding on the property. It was available quietly. The seller didn't want press. The bank wanted it gone. She didn't hesitate. She sent her offer. And a few weeks later, Danielle Rivers held the deed to the very building where they had once dismissed her. That was the turning point. Not because she finally won, but because she did it her way. No shortcuts, no handouts, just the long road, paved with late nights, small wins, and mentors who saw her light when others only saw shadows. She didn't just turn the page, she rewrote the chapter. Because when life laughs at you, sometimes the best response is to build something so solid, the world has no choice but to respect it. Danielle Rivers stood across the street, staring at the building. It was the same one. The same tall, cold structure of steel and glass that once held the boardroom where she had been laughed out of. The same glossy revolving doors. The same granite steps. The same smug silence that had swallowed her when she walked out of that pitch meeting 2 years ago. But now, everything was different. Because this time, she wasn't here to pitch. She was here to sign the final documents. Danielle had officially bought the building. The real estate company that once dismissed her had crumbled under bad investments and internal conflict. They held on for as long as they could, downsizing, cutting corners, trying to survive. But when their last major client backed out, the dominoes fell. Quietly, discreetly, desperately. They needed a buyer. Fast. Danielle, now a respected developer with 3 successful projects under her belt, heard the whispers. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate publicly. She just waited. When the listing finally appeared, under a shell company and masked through brokers, Danielle knew it immediately. She contacted her lawyer and submitted a direct, all-cash offer through one of her firms. No name attached. No headlines. She didn't want drama. She wanted closure. And now she had it. When she walked into the lobby that morning, time seemed to pause. The receptionist, who hadn't changed in 2 years, looked up. Her eyes widened, recognition flashing instantly. Danielle smiled and gave her a polite nod. No malice. No remember me. Just quiet, focused energy. She stepped into the elevator. Her heart beat slowly. She wasn't nervous. She was ready. She pressed the button to the top floor, the executive level. As the doors opened, memories came rushing back. She remembered how it felt to be in that boardroom. The marble floors, the massive conference table, the city skyline peeking through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the sound of laughter that echoed after her first pitch. It wasn't just a building. It was a monument to the moment they tried to shrink her and failed. Danielle didn't waste time. She walked straight to the boardroom. It was empty now, stripped of ego, titles, and suits. The chairs were neatly tucked in. The air felt cleaner. She paused by the whiteboard, the very one she had used to present her idea. It still had faint marker stains, as if pieces of her dream had never been fully erased. She pulled out a sticky note from her folder, wrote something on it, and placed it on the board. Danielle Rivers, owner. You laughed. I learned. Then came the staff meeting. As part of the acquisition, Danielle had inherited several remaining employees, assistants, security, maintenance staff, people who had nothing to do with the earlier dismissal, but were now looking at her with cautious curiosity. She stood at the front of the conference room, same space, different energy, and said, I know this building has a history, and for some of you, I'm part of a chapter you didn't expect. But we're not here to dwell on the past. We're here to rebuild. She paused, then added with a smile, starting with culture, respect, and shared ownership of where we go next. There was a pause, then light applause. Even the security guard smiled. But Danielle wasn't done. She wasn't just here to take over. She was here to transform. Within months, she had gutted the top floor and rebuilt it into her headquarters. Modern, open, filled with color, art, and light. The floor beneath became a co-working hub for women. Danielle Rivers didn't just own a building. She owned the moment. She owned the story. She owned her name, no longer whispered in doubt, but spoken with respect. But she hadn't come all this way just for titles, keys, or a fancy office. Danielle wasn't driven by revenge. She wasn't trying to make anyone feel small. She was trying to make space, real, physical space, for people who had been left out for far too long. So once the ink dried and the building was officially hers, she got to work again. Not on the drywall or the floors, on the mission. Small Blue Diamond redesigning the future. She took the top floor for her new headquarters, sleek, bright, filled with natural wood, warm tones, and open-air meeting spaces that encourage collaboration. No giant leather chairs. No intimidation tactics. Just clarity, innovation, and community. She gave every employee equity. Yes, even the receptionist who had watched her walk out of that boardroom 2 years earlier with pity in her eyes. Now that same receptionist greeted Danielle each morning with a smile and stock options. Danielle named her new company the Evelyn Group after her grandmother, the woman who used to tell her, "Don't just enter the room, baby. Light it up so others can see too." Below her office, she transformed the remaining floors into something visionary. One floor became an incubator for women-owned startups. Another for Black creatives, designers, filmmakers, writers, offering discounted studio spaces. One floor was reserved for mentorship hubs, connecting young people from underserved communities with professionals across finance, tech, and architecture. And the ground floor? It held a public cafe and event space where free workshops and networking nights took place every week. Danielle didn't just fill the building with tenants. She filled it with purpose. Small Blue Diamond, a new kind of power. 1 year after taking ownership, Danielle hosted her first public event inside the very boardroom that had once humiliated her. But this time, the seats were filled with young women in blazers, mothers with strollers, interns with big dreams, and community leaders who had never set foot in a space like this before. She stood at the front of the room again. No whiteboard this time, just a microphone. And she said, "I was laughed out of this room 2 years ago. And I get it. I didn't look the part. I didn't have the right degree. I didn't have a family name anyone recognized. But I had vision, and I had work ethic, and I had all of you in mind." She looked around the room, her voice steady. "They told me I didn't belong in this space. So I turned it into a space for everyone they left out." The crowd stood and clapped, not out of politeness, but out of resonance. Because in Danielle, they saw hope. They saw what happens when you don't give up. They saw themselves. Small Blue Diamond, one small moment, one big future. One afternoon, a little girl, about 10 or 11 years old, stood nervously at the front entrance of the building, holding her mother's hand and a notebook in the other. She wore a hoodie, her braids tied back in a ponytail, and wide eyes full of curiosity. Danielle happened to be walking through the lobby when she noticed her. "Hi there," she said, kneeling. "What's your name?" The girl looked up. "Imani." "Nice to meet you, Imani. What brings you here?" The girl held out her notebook. "My teacher told us to find a hero and write a report. I picked you." Danielle paused, not because she was shocked, but because that was the moment everything became real. It wasn't about the building. It wasn't about the pitch they rejected. It was about becoming the person she needed when she was younger. She smiled and invited Imani upstairs, gave her a tour, sat with her in the same office where powerful men once doubted her, and signed her notebook with one message: dreams don't expire. Keep building. Small Blue Diamond legacy mode activated. Danielle Rivers didn't stop there. She launched a real estate fund specifically to back underrepresented developers. She created a digital platform that matched aspiring women entrepreneurs with angel investors. She taught high schoolers how to analyze property deals instead of just memorizing textbook theories. She turned her scars into maps, her rejections into lessons, and her journey into blueprints that others could follow. She became more than a CEO. She became a movement. Small Blue Diamond, final words for your audience. Don't forget to like the video. Loudspeakers subscribe for more powerful, real-life, inspired stories.